Some stories don't begin with hope, they begin with loss and quiet fear. This is one of those stories, about a woman who thought her time had passed, until life asked her to begin again. The room was too cold, and the glass table reflected her face back at her. Older than she remembered, trying to stay neutral, trying not to feel anything yet. They spoke softly, with rehearsed kindness and careful pauses, as if gentleness could soften the blow, as if words could disguise replacement, as if she wouldn't notice what was happening. She nodded while they talked about restructuring, about fresh perspectives and new energy, about gratitude for her years of service, while realizing the decision was already final, long before she entered the room. A younger name was mentioned casually, not as a threat, just as a fact, and something inside her tightened instantly, because she understood the translation, without anyone having to explain it. She gathered her things slowly, each movement controlled and polite, as if dignity could protect her from collapse, as if walking calmly meant she wasn't breaking, even though her chest felt hollow. In the elevator, alone at last, the silence pressed against her ears, and for the first time in decades, she didn't know where she belonged, or who she was without that title. The doors opened to the street, life continuing without hesitation or mercy, and she stepped forward automatically, carrying a quiet thought she couldn't escape. Something had ended, and she didn't know what came next. Her house greeted her with stillness, no voices, no urgency, no reason to rush, just familiar walls, watching her return early, on a day that wasn't supposed to end yet, on a life that suddenly felt paused. She placed her bag down carefully, as if noise might confirm the truth, then stood in the kitchen without moving. Not hungry, not tired, not crying yet, just suspended in disbelief. Every object felt like evidence, proof of a life built on consistency and control. Proof that she had done everything right, followed rules, stayed loyal, worked hard, and still ended up here. She sat on the couch and stared ahead, the quiet growing louder by the minute, and realized how much her identity depended on being needed, on being useful, on being part of something larger. Her phone remained silent beside her, no messages, no urgent requests, no one needing her to fix a problem, and the absence felt heavier than noise, like being erased slowly. She wondered how long the world waits before deciding someone is outdated, before experience becomes invisible, before reliability is replaced by novelty, without ceremony or warning. As evening approached, the light shifted across the room, and with it came an uncomfortable truth. Tomorrow would arrive the same way, but her life no longer had a schedule. The interviews began with polite smiles, faces trained to look attentive and impressed, yet something always shifted halfway through. A subtle distance she couldn't ignore, a hesitation that never needed explanation. They praised her experience generously, called it impressive and admirable, then asked about adaptability, energy, speed, about keeping up with changing environments, questions that felt more like judgments. She answered confidently at first, drawing from decades of problem solving, but sensed the decision forming before she finished, as if her age spoke louder than her words, as if time itself worked against her. Sometimes the rejections were gentle, sometimes they simply never replied, and each silence carried the same message. They were looking for someone else, someone newer, someone younger. Friends offered suggestions meant to comfort, phrases like slowing down or adjusting expectations, spoken softly but landing sharply, because beneath the kindness was an assumption that her peak had already passed. At night, doubt crept in quietly, questioning everything she once believed, asking whether loyalty had been a mistake, whether dedication had been wasted, whether she had waited too long. She stared at the ceiling, wondering how someone could disappear professionally, without changing at all on the inside, still capable, still sharp, still willing, yet suddenly unwanted. The comment came casually, wrapped in concern and practicality, spoken by someone who loved her, someone who thought they were helping, someone who didn't realize the damage. Maybe this is a sign, they suggested gently over coffee, a sign to rest, to accept less pressure, to stop fighting the current, to let go of what was. She smiled and nodded politely, but inside something resisted fiercely, not out of pride, but out of fear, because accepting that advice felt final, like agreeing to fade quietly. That night, the words replayed endlessly, each repetition heavier than the last, until they sounded less like concern, and more like a verdict she hadn't agreed to, a future chosen without her consent. She wondered when society decided that reinvention had an expiration date, that ambition should soften with age, that purpose had a timeline, and hers had already ended. Tears came unexpectedly then, not dramatic, just steady and tired, carrying grief for a self she wasn't ready to lose, for a life she wasn't finished living, for strength she still felt inside. As she wiped her face, a quiet refusal formed beneath the sadness. Not yet a plan, not yet courage, just a small, stubborn thought. This cannot be the end. If this story feels familiar to you, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts below. Your presence here matters more than you know, and your story might be closer to this one than you think. A week later, she stopped by a small local shop, owned by a woman who looked exhausted, complaining about constant stress and confusion, about things falling apart without clear reasons, about feeling overwhelmed every single day. Without thinking, she listened carefully, asked quiet questions, noticed patterns instantly, and began suggesting small changes naturally, the way she always had at work, the way she never considered special. They talked for hours that afternoon, moving papers, clarifying roles, adjusting routines, and by closing time, the space felt lighter, not perfect, but calmer, more manageable, and visibly improved. The owner looked at her with relief, surprised by how much had shifted so quickly, and thanked her repeatedly with genuine gratitude, saying she hadn't felt this hopeful in months, saying she finally could breathe. Walking home, something stirred inside her, a realization she had never named before. This was what she had always done, quietly fixing broken systems behind the scenes, without recognition or credit. She had solved problems no one noticed, prevented chaos before it became visible, kept things running smoothly without applause, and somehow convinced herself it was nothing, just part of the job. That night, a question surfaced gently, not demanding, just curious and alive. What if this ability had value on its own? What if it wasn't tied to a company? What if it belonged to her? She didn't sleep much after that, not from anxiety, but from possibility, because for the first time since the meeting, the future felt uncertain in a different way, like a door slightly open instead of closed. The idea stayed with her longer than expected, hovering in her thoughts during quiet mornings, returning at night when the house fell silent, growing louder each time she tried to ignore it, until fear and curiosity stood face to face. Offering help casually was one thing, but calling it work felt dangerously exposed, because now there would be expectations, judgment, opinions, and the possibility of failure. With no company name to hide behind, she imagined introducing herself, saying what she did without a title, without credentials that sounded impressive, only her experience and intuition, and wondered who would take that seriously. The thought of rejection returned sharply, bringing back interview rooms and polite smiles, and she questioned whether she was strong enough to hear no again without breaking, to risk believing in herself openly. Yet something inside refused to stay silent, a quiet voice reminding her she had nothing left to protect by staying invisible, because invisibility had already cost her everything, and safety no longer felt safe. She wrote a simple description that night, not elegant, not ambitious, just honest, explaining how she helped businesses run better, how she brought clarity where there was chaos, and saved it without sending it to anyone. Before going to bed, she reread the words, feeling both terrified and strangely grounded, because for the first time in months, the fear was mixed with ownership, as if she had finally stepped forward. The first reply came unexpectedly, from someone she barely knew, a small business owner overwhelmed and tired, asking if she could meet and talk, asking what it would cost. She stared at the message too long, heart racing faster than it should have, and hesitated before answering, unsure how to price her own worth, unsure how to sound confident. They met in a quiet office space, papers scattered, tension hanging in the air, and she listened more than she spoke, recognizing familiar patterns immediately, the kind she had fixed countless times before. She offered suggestions carefully at first, then more freely as the conversation flowed, watching confusion turn into relief, stress soften into understanding, and chaos begin to organize itself. When payment was mentioned again, she named a modest amount almost apologetically, bracing herself for resistance or doubt, but instead received a simple nod and an agreement without hesitation. As they shook hands, something subtle but powerful shifted. She wasn't being tolerated or tested, she was being trusted, and that recognition settled deeply. Walking away, the money felt secondary. What mattered was the clarity inside her, proof that her experience had value, even without permission or validation, even standing alone. The work demanded more than she expected. Long hours thinking through details, anticipating problems before they surfaced, and caring deeply because it was hers now, not because someone demanded it. There were no guarantees of continuity, no contracts promising security, only the responsibility to deliver results, and the quiet pressure of representing herself, with no margin for excuses. She organized systems patiently, clarified roles that had blurred over time, simplified routines that drained energy, and watched productivity rise slowly, like order returning after a storm. Each small improvement felt personal, as if every solved issue restored something inside her: confidence she thought she had lost, trust in her own judgment, pride she had been taught to hide. At night, exhaustion mixed with fulfillment, a different kind of tiredness than before, one that came from intention rather than obligation, from choosing effort rather than enduring it, from building instead of surviving. She noticed how her posture changed, how she spoke with more certainty, how doubt still appeared but no longer dominated, because evidence now stood beside her, quietly reinforcing her belief. Even without promises, she felt more secure than she had in years. Not because the future was clear, but because she finally trusted herself to face whatever came next. Despite visible progress, the familiar voice of doubt returned persistently, questioning whether she deserved the praise, whether her success was temporary, whether she was overestimating herself. She lowered her prices reflexively, added extra work without mentioning it, apologized for things that needed no apology, and feared being exposed as insufficient, even while delivering results consistently. Compliments made her uncomfortable, as if acknowledgement required justification, as if confidence might provoke rejection, and she struggled to stand fully in her role, without shrinking instinctively. She compared herself silently to others, younger consultants with bold language, polished presentations and online presence, and wondered if she was already behind again, if time was once more working against her. One evening, reviewing her work objectively, she saw undeniable improvement and impact. Numbers stabilized, stress reduced, clarity restored, and realized the facts contradicted her fears, even if her emotions lagged behind. She sat with that discomfort deliberately, allowing doubt to exist without obeying it, recognizing it as habit rather than truth. A residue of years spent minimizing herself to remain acceptable. That night marked a quiet decision, not dramatic or confident yet, just a refusal to keep erasing herself. A willingness to occupy space slowly, one choice at a time. Recommendations started arriving naturally, shared between business owners over coffee, spoken casually but sincerely, about the woman who brought order and calm, who understood without judgment. New inquiries followed soon after, each one surprising her more than the last, not because she doubted her ability, but because she wasn't used to being sought after, without having to explain herself. She became more selective unconsciously, listening carefully before committing, choosing clients aligned with her values, and realizing choice itself was a form of power, one she had never experienced before. Her calendar filled gradually, not with urgency, but with intention, and for the first time in years, work felt aligned with her rhythm, instead of draining it. She noticed respect in conversations, not forced, not performative, but rooted in results and reliability, and something inside her softened, allowing pride without guilt. The income stabilized unexpectedly, quietly surpassing what she had anticipated. Yet money remained secondary to the shift within, the realization that she was no longer asking, she was offering. As she closed her notebook one evening, a sense of grounded confidence settled in, because she finally understood something crucial. Her value had never disappeared, it had simply been waiting to be claimed. The moment came quietly, during a conversation that should have felt routine, when a new client asked for her rate, and she hesitated out of habit, already preparing to lower it. She felt the old reflex rise, the urge to justify, to explain, to soften, to make herself easier to accept. But something stopped her mid-thought, a pause that felt unfamiliar and strong. She named her price clearly, without apology or long explanations. Her voice steady, despite the tension inside, and waited without filling the silence, allowing space for a response. The answer came simply, a calm agreement without negotiation, as if the number made sense all along, as if the doubt had lived only in her, not in the world around her. Relief washed over her slowly, followed by something deeper than satisfaction. The realization that she had crossed an invisible line, from asking to declaring, from shrinking to standing. She reflected on how often she had undercut herself, not because she lacked skill, but because she feared being seen as too much, too confident, too present, too unwilling to disappear. That day she didn't feel triumphant, just aligned in a quiet, powerful way. Because for the first time in years, her external value matched her internal truth, and the gap between them began to close. The email arrived unexpectedly, bearing a familiar company name, one she hadn't thought about in months, and her chest tightened instantly as old memories resurfaced. They had heard about her work, about the improvements she was known for, and wanted to talk about a potential collaboration. Their tone, respectful now, almost admiring, very different from the final meeting. She read the message several times, feeling a mix of validation and discomfort, because part of her had once longed for this, for acknowledgement, for regret, for proof that letting her go was a mistake. Her mind revisited that glass-walled room, the polite words and controlled smiles, the quiet dismissal of her worth, and she noticed how distant it all felt now, like a chapter she had already outgrown. For a moment, she imagined returning, not out of need, but from a sense of closure. Imagined showing them who she had become, imagined reclaiming respect on familiar ground, and felt the temptation linger. But alongside that thought came clarity, a recognition of how far she had traveled, not professionally, but internally. And she questioned whether reopening that door would honor the woman she was now. She didn't respond immediately, choosing to sit with the discomfort honestly, because this decision mattered differently. It wasn't about opportunity anymore, it was about alignment. The realization came softly, one quiet morning as she reviewed her schedule. Clients she respected, work she controlled, a rhythm that supported her life, not consumed it. She understood then that returning wouldn't be redemption, it would be repetition. A step backward into a structure she had worked hard to leave, what she once wanted desperately, approval from those who dismissed her, no longer held the same weight, because she had built something independent, something that didn't require permission. She drafted a polite response, thankful, professional, and clear, declining the invitation respectfully, without explanations or emotional undertones, just honesty. As she sent the message, there was no surge of victory or anger, only calm certainty, the kind that settles when a decision is right and doesn't ask to be celebrated. She noticed how little she needed from them now, no validation, no apology, no acknowledgement, because her life no longer revolved around their gaze, and that realization felt like freedom, pure and unburdened. Closing her laptop, she felt lighter in a way she hadn't expected, as if releasing the past had freed more space. For the present she was actively choosing, and the future she trusted herself to shape. Stability arrived quietly, not through dramatic wins or announcements, but through consistency and trust, through work that flowed without resistance, through days that felt balanced. Her income supported her fully now, without anxiety or constant calculation. But money was no longer the measure. It was simply a tool, not the source of her worth. Success, she realized, no longer meant titles or recognition, or being chosen by powerful rooms. It meant autonomy, respect, and peace, all earned on her own terms. She designed her days intentionally, choosing when to work and when to rest, honoring her energy instead of ignoring it, and noticing how her confidence deepened when her life reflected her values. People listened differently now, not because she demanded authority, but because she embodied clarity, and that presence carried weight without needing performance. She felt proud without guilt, secure without arrogance, and grounded in a way she had never experienced before. Because nothing she had now could be taken easily, it was built from within. Looking around at the life she had created, she understood that success wasn't louder, it was quieter and more honest, and for the first time, it felt sustainable. One evening, reflecting on her journey, she traced the path from loss to self-trust, and realized how little had been accidental, each step shaped by choice. Even when fear was present, she had not been replaced, she had been redirected, pushed out of a space that no longer fit, into a life that required her fully, without dilution. What once felt like rejection revealed itself as permission. Permission to claim her voice, her experience, her authority, without waiting to be invited. She thought of women like herself, quietly questioning their relevance, measuring themselves against shrinking spaces, and wished they could see this truth sooner, that nothing had expired within them. Her story was no longer about survival, it was about becoming visible to herself, about choosing presence over approval, and building something meaningful from truth, not fear. As she closed her notebook for the night, there was no dramatic ending, only a deep sense of continuity. Because this wasn't a conclusion, it was a beginning she owned, and for the first time, the future didn't ask her to prove anything. It simply invited her to keep going, exactly as she was, whole, capable, and free. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it resonated with you, know that you're not alone, and that it's never too late to begin again. Subscribe to the channel and keep walking with us, because some journeys only make sense when we share them.